Hello and welcome to A Fresh Take. I'm Mark Pennell, along with our pastor, Paul Sartorelli from Trinity here in Mentor. A wonderful church, a wonderful pastor. He knows his stuff. He knows a lot of people who know their stuff, too. And he's always bantering with, and I'm serious.
And it's a wonderful life, too.
Yes. But anyway, my point is this man comes with some credentials.
Credentials in a suitcase.
Yeah. Yes.
I bought them at the Fuller Brush Man store.
And you have some tonic that'll make them feel much better.
You know, part of it, let's say two things. Part of it, credentials or not. The idea of A Fresh Take is two guys who are a bit spiritually minded because of Christ, and I hope our feet are on the ground. And that's the fresh take part. We want to look at life and talk about it from a Christ-centered perspective, and we don't even have all the answers. And the other thing I want to say is we haven't seen you guys in a long time.
November of last year.
Yeah. Slackers, both of us.
Yes.
But we have a good reason.
Well, the biggest reason is you had COVID.
I did.
And he had his shots. Okay, we're not getting into the politics of all that. We're just, the fact is you had your shots.
I did. I had my shots, and I caught it from my 91-year-old mother, of all things, and she actually survived COVID as well. But I could tell I was getting it. I tested positive. I called a pulmonologist friend of mine, lung specialist. And long story short, he had me go into the emergency room. I met him there. He gave me what was called a monoclonal antibody treatment. It's the IV where they're just filling my body filled with antibodies. He did say, speaking of vaccines, he said, "Which one did you get?" I said, "I got the Johnson & Johnson." He said, that one's petering out. We need to.
Is it really?
Yeah, it was back then in November. So anyway, we didn't do COVID. We didn't do this show. First, because we had COVID. I had it. And by the way, it was an experience. I have a little bit of asthma.
Yes.
And it was sometimes breathing was really hard. And then you've heard this before, I bet. I was really, really tired for a couple of weeks. Brain fog.
Is that what's wrong with me?
You've had COVID for 17 years. I couldn't study. I couldn't think. I did one sermon actually in this studio for our church. I came in here COVID bound, but I so missed teaching and being with people, even though I wasn't with them, so that we videoed my sermon, and I'm wheezing away. Anyway, it was hard to write even because I was so brain fogged. But it's a good way to start. We finished, and we're going to pick it up now and end it. COVID and suffering and pandemics and Job all go together.
Yeah. By the way, we're finishing Job. If you miss what's going on, that's where we are.
Yeah. So, I mean, we are timed. You're not. So you could go see all those shows. So it's sort of fitting that as society and me suffered from this pandemic, we talked a bit about the book of Job and the suffering and where all of that is. And so we don't want to make light of any of that.
No.
But suffering is the topic, and COVID is sort of the issue du jour. So they go together.
Yeah. Okay, first of all, you want to talk about the providence and sovereignty of God. What do you mean by that?
Well, I want to talk about it because now as we rush back to the book of Job, and because what we didn't do is we didn't conclude it. We talked the whole story. So what are the sort of the summary ideas, not just from the book of Job, but for all of our suffering?
Okay.
Two big theological words, sovereignty and providence. Sovereignty says God's in charge. Providence is everything is flowing according to his will, according to his providence.
A lot of times, I used to say before I was a believer that I had good or bad luck.
Yeah.
When I have good luck nowadays, I think of it as providence. I mean, if something happens that's really, like you and I meeting was providence. That wasn't just a chance. That wasn't something that came out of the blue. That was his plan. Yes. I deeply believe that.
That somehow behind all of the issues of life and history, God's providence is working things together.
Correct.
Now, it includes our choices, and it includes evil things and all of that, but God supersedes all of that. So to say that in the book of Job, I mean, the story of the book of Job is God going to Satan and saying, "Look at my servant Job," and then all of this stuff happens to Job. God is still the sovereign orchestrator of the entire drama, and he is of our lives too. So whatever suffering we go through, and we do, God is still on the throne. He is still sovereign. He's still in charge. He's not wringing his hands saying, oh, darn, I didn't know Paul was going to get COVID.
Yeah.
I got it.
Yeah. I was thinking about this last night. It's basically 3 against 1. There's our fallenness, there's the world that we're living in, and of course there's Satan, all against him. And he's going to defeat it all.
He is indeed.
But we have to focus on him. We can't look at ourselves and realize what sinners we are, or worse, not realize what sinners we are. We have to just focus on him, and somehow or another we can get through it.
We can, but with his strength. But you say it well. The deck is stacked against us, humanity, creation, because we live in a fallen world.
Right.
And so we do experience evil. You know, as we are recording this, Mark and I were just talking about a bunch of Russian troops are on the border of Ukraine. Jesus promised that there would always be wars and rumors of wars. Here's another potential one. I sure hope we don't go from the world going from a pandemic to the world going into World War III. That would be awful. And yet, God's sovereign.
Yeah.
We are evil. We live in an upside down, dark world, but God is still sovereign and providential over that.
We're going to introduce you, or maybe remind you of someone who I think in some ways best reminds us of how Job went through what he had to.
Yes, at the end of the show, It's something that, yes, we'll get there. So important to remember the brokenness, but I think Job reminds us too the limits of our understanding. Job has these 3 friends that, God bless them, they try really hard to comfort him, give him answers, which, by the way, if somebody is going through suffering, they don't necessarily need answers.
Right. Sometimes being quiet and just being with them is just fine.
Which is the way they started.
Yeah.
And then they ended.
They didn't talk for like a week.
They were silent, and then once they started talking, that's when
they started putting their feet in their mouth.
Yeah, but that's the book of the bulk of the book. So just to remind all of ourselves, we are limited in our understanding. What does Paul say in 1 Corinthians? As we look at reality, we look through a glass darkly. We look through a foggy mirror, I think one of the paraphrases says, meaning we can't figure it out. And we try to figure it out, but we don't understand. We don't understand why 2 people, both with cancer, let's say, pray, and one of them gets healed and the other one passes away. We don't understand. And that's part of the difficulty of the pain, is that we don't understand. Now, I think the point of the story of Job, and therefore of our lives, is that we don't understand the pain. We know someone who does.
Yeah.
And it sounds trite sometimes, but it's real.
I also think sometimes that, yes, we are limited to our understanding, but at the same time, he is not like we're a dog and he's holding the bone up here and asking us to jump up here. He isn't doing something on purpose to make us ignorant. I mean, he wants to meet us.
Right.
And so he is, but we have to have the right frame of mind, and that means centered around him.
Totally. I mean, the consequences of the fall keep us from knowing him. Our sin nature keeps us from knowing him. And in a sense, our humanity and his deity they transcend. So it's hard. And yet, through his word and through his son, he came down so that he would be knowable, and through his son, he would be able to identify with our pain and with our suffering. And that's not so much the book of Job, but that's Job looking forward into the New Testament to remind us all, we're all mini Jobs, sort of, and we all need a Savior who can give us hope for tomorrow and strength for today, even in the midst of our suffering. That's the gospel. That's the resurrection hope.
Can we talk about her now?
Yeah, on Monday something happened that someone passed away. But you knew her. You knew about her. This is new to me.
My wife, who doesn't usually watch these kind of shows, says you have to watch America's Got Talent. So I went on YouTube where this episode had taken place and watched this. I thought she was just a young girl. She turned out to be 30 years old. Sing for what's his name?
Simon Cowell and
you're right.
the other panelists.
Right. Anyway, so
Jane Marcheski is her name. Is that the way you're pronouncing it?
Yes.
It sounds Polish.
Yeah. But she goes by Nightbirde. She was incredibly beautiful, and I don't mean that in a, how we men look at women sometimes. I'm talking about an incredibly beautiful creature as God made women to be, just was it something glowing about her. Something.
Yeah. And yet very frail because of her illness too.
Right. And then she sang a song that she had written, I guess.
Yeah, she said she wrote it.
It's okay. That's the name of the song. And she did it with such an incredible voice. And then she finishes off by saying that she has cancer and she has a 2% chance of surviving. Simon is unbelievably touched.
Yeah. At one point, he even stops before, I don't know if you know the show, but they vote yes or no. And they all talk about her first. And they all talked in glowing words about her song. It was moving. And we hope to put a link to that, to this show. So look for it. But at one point, Simon Cowell, who's normally the tough guy in the show, he's all choked up. And in a moment of his inability to speak, Nightbirde then chimes in and she says, "You can't wait until life isn't hard anymore to decide to be happy." And it's like, wow.
Yeah.
Now, she was sort of limited by what she said there, and you have to be on national television. Yeah. The more we learned about it, and the staff of Americans Got Talent was touched by her story. The nation, again, I live in a cave, and I still think that the Yankees won the World Series of 1962. But the rest of America was touched by this lady.
Right.
I read an article just the other day that described the depth of her hope that didn't really come out on the show.
No.
And it's Christ-centered.
Right. And you sent it to me last night. And I'd prayed about her, and I knew I'd never forget her. She died. She died
on Monday. We're taping this on a Wednesday. She died on Monday. And some of the things, she's from Zanesville, Ohio, which, by the way, which we found interesting because we're sitting here in Mentor, Ohio, just north a couple of hours. The thing that I sent to Mark was an article that just basically looked at some of her words. She had a blog that she would write about. And
brilliant.
She was
depth of wisdom was
yes.
I wish I had that.
She was a modern day Job with more wisdom than Job.
Yeah.
Can I just read one and then you can read some too?
Okay.
Because I think they just help us focus on this whole issue of pain and loneliness and the nearness of God.
Yeah.
Here's one thing she wrote, she said in an interview, "I believe that God can heal in one instant." This is a person that has a 2% chance of surviving her cancer, and yet she still has that hope, and yet there's a realism to it. She goes on to say, "I also believe that no good thing does he withhold. So there was something God was growing in the field that is me. And if God had pulled up all of this hardship too soon, it would have also pulled up all these miracles he did in my spirit." Man, that is so profound. In other words, she's saying she is the person that she is today, not physically, but spiritually and emotionally, maturely, because God was doing a work. Here's sovereignty. God was doing a work through her pain, through her cancer. What perspective?
One of the reasons, the main reason she called herself Nightbirde, she dreamed about three birds singing in the night for 3 nights. Birds singing for 3 nights. And she said, "I want to be that way, even when I'm in the middle of a dark time. There are no signs that it will end." She said, "I want to be the bird that sings in anticipation of good things that I trust are coming." I mean, she went on and on. The quote, I did not know she was a believer until last night when Paul sent me this. And I was so grateful that she is now with him. Mm-hmm. But she did something else. I think it's just truly amazing. And it's hard to understand if you don't know who our Savior is. So I don't want to try to talk down to you, but you have to understand something. She only lived to 31, probably. And God used her in the most wonderful way that she touched people's lives for their rest of their lives. And maybe will be remembered after that. So despite the incredible pain she had to go, she talks about when she was on the bathroom floor because she'd been barfing all night due to her cancer problems. And yet she wrote
a blog post that says, God is on the bathroom floor.
Yes.
I mean, it was a beautiful statement of hope, of presence, that God was still near her.
Yeah.
And I guess that's the story of Job and even of our lives, that as we go through the pain, we can either push God away or we can recognize he wants to be near.
I want read another quote based on what you just said. Quote, I am still reeling, drenched in sorrow. I am still begging, bargaining, demanding, disappearing. I guess this means that I have all the more reason to say thank you, because God is drawing near to me again, 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 no matter how many times he is sent away.
You know, very minor compared to, well, obviously what Nightbirde went through. But when I was going through COVID, there were times where I had a really hard time breathing. And I just remember being frustrated. I couldn't do what I meant to do. And in a sense, I was going to try to solve this on my own. Okay. And I don't know that I was literally pushing God away, but I sort of was. And yet the message of Job and of this show is that God is near and that we can't do this on our own. God will be near even when we push him away. He's that faithful friend that always comes back and back and back.
Suppose she had not been a believer and she went through all this. How do you think her frame of mind would have been all the way to the end? She had a frame of mind that was victorious, for lack of a better word, until the day she died. So God used her. God was with her and showed her so much about how much he loves her that she was able to give it to other people.
Yep. Two sides of that coin, and I think that's why America is so enthralled by her. On the one hand, we all identify with her pain and with her strength of hope. And that's what you even saw on that show. If you watch her singing, you'll see that. And yet, when you got to know her story, you realized that it was not just hope for hope's sake. The hope was based on a person, and it was on the person of God, on the will of God, and even on Christ, who gives us eternal hope because of his resurrection. Right. Both of those. I mean, yeah, she was our word for today.
And I have to be careful in this. In a small way, she kind of reminded me of Christ because she gave herself to him and glowed with the Spirit, if you will, and showed us what his love is.
Yeah. The
difference is when she died, she went to heaven. When Jesus died, he came back before going to heaven.
Yeah.
I mean, he came back because we were wasted. We were mere shells of what we were supposed to be. And he came and fulfilled our lives by giving us a reason for living at this time.
And his resurrection is our tangible hope in the midst of our suffering and in the midst of our pain. And in many ways, every now and then we wonder, what do we call the show? We thought we would call today COVID, Job, Nightbirde, and God is near. That's our statement of today. It's great to be back on Fresh Take.
Thank you.